So you're building React apps without TypeScript? Oh man, oh man, oh man. That's like riding a motorcycle without a helmet. I mean, I get it. Sometimes TypeScript looks like it's built to ruin your day. But here's the thing. You don't need to know all of these complex generics and mind-bending types to get started. In this video, I will teach you the exact amount of TypeScript you need to know to get started. We will take a JavaScript React project and convert it to a TypeScript project. In the process of that, we will learn everything about types, interfaces, generics, props, best practices, and much more. So now, without any further ado, how about we roll the video? Let's go! So friends, right here I have created a little example which will help you learn TypeScript. Who would have thought? So let's first of all look at the example. Inside of here I can create a new task. We can pass a title like create video, some sort of description, some gibberish, in priority of low, normal or high, and then a due date, for example the 28th. If I now add the task, we see the title, the description, the priority and how many days are left. Also, I can mark my task as completed or I can delete the task. So this example has been created with JavaScript and React. This means if I go back to my code base and to my task list.jsx, you see that this is a JSX file, meaning JavaScript with React. Now here are two ways to learn TypeScript. Either you could do it the boring way, we could learn what a type is, what inference is, what a generic is, stuff like that. I mean, let's be honest, this is boring. Nobody wants to see that. We want to learn TypeScript while using it, if this makes sense. So here's what we'll do in this video. We will take this task list.jsx, the JavaScript code, and we will convert it to TypeScript. And that's how you will learn TypeScript. So, I mean, let's do it, right? Let's first of all get started by converting the file to a TypeScript file. So instead of having a .jsx ending, we want to have a .tsx ending. So now this is a TypeScript file and you instantly see a lot of errors. So if I hover over the first error, it says binding element title implicitly has an any type. Okay. Let's go to the E. Parameter E implicitly has an any type. Then let's continue. A has an any type. Okay, we have some sort of problem with any. What's the problem? Well, let's look at the page.tsx. In the page.tsx, I render the task list. As mentioned, this component. And in my params, right here, I currently the structure and title. And this title is what I render right here, my personal task. This means if I change it to, for example, hello, then you will see right here, hello. But now here's the thing. Let's imagine instead of passing a string, I pass an array. So let's get an array. In the array, I will have an object with a title and I will say hello. And as you now see, I don't get any error inside of here. And this means if I save this and go back, this is weird. We get an error. So I get an error in my website, but I don't get an error in my code base. That's not what I want. And here is already the reason why you want to use TypeScript. So let's first of all answer the first question. What even is TypeScript? So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. What does this mean in plain English? This means at the end of the day, you still write JavaScript. This is still JavaScript code inside of here, but you add types. Later on, once you compile your code, it will still generate JavaScript, but when you write the code, you write JavaScript with types. What are types? Well, as mentioned, currently title has a type of any. This means TypeScript does not really know what type it is, but we know what type it is. We want title to be a string. This means we want to only pass a string. No arrays, no objects. This means if I would now, we will do it later on, say, hey, I only want to get a string, then this will throw an error because this isn't a string. This is an array with an object. So what are the benefits of TypeScript? What are the benefits of types? Good question. Well, at the end of the day, we have better auto-completion and we catch errors more easily and faster. So currently right here, we should have passed a string, but we don't throw an error. That's a big problem. Let's go to our handle submit. Right here we do an e.prevent default. This means we don't want to submit the form instantly. We don't want to do a hard refresh. But what is if instead of saying prevent default, I say prevent default? I misspell it. I don't get an error, as you see. There's no red squiggly line like with the E. That's a big problem. So with TypeScript, we get auto-completion and we see errors instantly. Also, it's more scalable. Imagine you have a new team member on your team and now he starts working on this project. Right here in the params, we get a task. What type is task? Is it an object, an array? You don't know as a newcomer. At the end of the day, it's an object with multiple properties like a due date, title, description. But a new developer does not know that. And at the end of the day, this results in unscalable and unmaintainable code, especially if your project becomes very big. So now we know what TypeScript is, we know the benefits, and we all know that you should probably use it. So let's start by implementing TypeScript, or let's start by implementing types in this project. Let's start with the title. So what type is title? As you all know, we expect a string. This means I can right here add an object. We want to get a title, and title is of type string. So you add a colon and then type string. If I would expect a number, I could say, hey, title is number. And this means if I save this and go back to my page.tsx, we instantly get an error. And if I hover over title, it says expected type comes from property title, which is declared on title number. But currently we don't pass a number, but we pass an array. This means if I pass in 5, the error goes away. And if I go back to my project, we see number 5. So now let's say I want to get a string. This means if I save this and go back, we again get an error. And that's because type number is not assignable to type string. So instead of 5, we want to pass my personal tasks. If I save this and go back, no errors, everything is rendered, and that's great. Now here's one thing which I want to mention right at the start. TypeScript errors are something very normal whenever you work in TypeScript projects. And sometimes these error messages are not very simple. So for example, right here, it's relatively simple. It says, hey, type title string array is not assignable to string. So now you know, okay, an object array is not assignable to string. Let's fix that. But in some cases, these error messages can become very, very long. My tip to you is always go to the last error message, to this one. And this error message is the one which in most cases gives you the most context to fix your problem. But we will come to that also a bit later on. For now, let's give our title again in string, and instead of hello, this will be my personal tasks. Okay, this is now finished. Let's now continue. So now we have our handle submit function. In the handle submit function, in the params, I get an event. What type is event? Now this is one of these types which you just have to, at the end of the day, remember. Nobody tells you what it is. You can always go to Google and just say, hey, I forgot what type was event again, and then you will see event is of type form event. So we can say, hey, E is of type React. React is imported from React.form event. And now if I go right here to my prevent default and do a dot, we instantly get the prevent default and I don't have to write anything myself. So this is the auto completion. Let's invoke it, and now this is also finished. So let's continue with the next problem, and this one deals with our new task. What's the problem? No red error messages. What is there to fix? So first of all, if I hover over new task, you already see the types. ID, title, description, priority, due date, and a completed boolean, so true or false. What's the problem right here? So first of all, you see that TypeScript infers the types. So TypeScript already knows what types we have passed right here. It knows what description is, what priority is, what everything is. That's great. But let's again imagine the following. We get a new team member, and this team member works on this component. And then he does this stupid mistake. For the title, he misspells it. We don't have any error message. And let's imagine our mutation is bound to the title, not to title, but to title. We don't get any errors, and at the end of the day, this developer will push this code to production, and this developer will break production, not what you want. So what we want to do is, we want to give this object a type or multiple types at the end of the day, so that there's no way to make an error. So how do we do that? Well, it's relatively simple. We want to use something which is called an interface. With an interface, you at the end of the day can pretty much give an object a type. So above our export function, we can create an interface. And for the name, in this case, task makes a lot of sense because this object is our task, right? So right here. So let's do an interface task and let's open an object. What do we do now inside of here? Well, inside of here, we want to now provide all of our types. What do we have? We have an ID. Let's copy paste it. What type is ID? It's a number. Then what else do we have? We have a title. What type is title? Title is of string. Then what else do we have? We have, of course, a description. What type is description? It's in string. And you always do it with a colon. You see description, colon, and then the type. Also, please don't forget to add a semicolon. Then let's continue. What else do we have? We have the priority. What type is the priority? Well, as you see, it's of type string. So let's add string. Then what else do we have? We have a due date. And then what type is due date? Good question. Is it a string? Kinda, but not really. Date is an object, a date object, meaning it's of type date. And what else do we have? We have completed, and completed is false. What does this mean? Completed is in Boolean, so completed will be equal to Boolean. So now we have all of our types. This means we can now use our interface task, and we can give our new task a type of task. So we can again use our colon, and this will be equal to our task. So as you see, no errors. But what is if I delete completed and click on Control Spacebar? Or let's actually not do anything. You already see we have an error for new task, and it says property completed is missing. Aha, interesting. And if I now click on Control Spacebar, we get completed. And I can set it to false. If I now delete, for example, completed and the due date, I again get an error. And if I hover over new task, it says, hey, we are missing due date and completed. So this is the power of TypeScript. And if I misspell completed, again, we get an error because completed does not exist in type task. So let's again spell it correctly. And now we are finished with new task. It's now type safe, and it works as expected. Now here's one thing which I want to also mention. Currently we use an interface, right, to pretty much create our object types. But there are actually two ways to do the same thing in TypeScript. You can either use an interface or you can use a type. So we can create, for example, a type, and the name will be task list props, and then this will be equal to an object, and inside of here I can create the same code as you see. I can pass a title. You know what, let me just copy it, paste it inside of here, and then I can use the task list props. I can again scroll to the bottom, and instead of giving our new task a type of task, we can give it a type of task list props. As you see, the result is still the same, meaning if I delete completed, I still get the same error. So if I hover over new task, it says, hey, completed is missing, please pass it. And if I now misspell completed, I again get an error. So this works exactly as expected. So now you probably ask yourself, when should I use a type and when should I use an interface? Well, you know what? There's no right or wrong answer. Some people mix it. Sometimes they use interfaces, sometimes they use types. Then there are people which only use types. At the end of the day, there's no correct answer. But here's my opinion. An interface is there when you want to pretty much use it for objects and props. So for example, for our title, I could also create an interface. I could create an interface, I could call it iAppProps, and then inside of here, I could get a title of type string. And then instead of doing this manual work, I could only say right here, we destructure title, and this is of type iAppProps. And if I again delete the title and click on Control Spacebar, you see I get the title. So whenever I work with objects and at the end of the day props, I would always recommend you to use an interface. So when would I use a type? Well, I would use a type whenever I use unions. What are unions? So a union at the end of the day is pretty much when you have multiple options. So let's look at, for example, our priority. Our priority is currently a string, right? But at the end of the day, we only have 3 options. We only have low, normal, or high. These are our priority options. And at the end of the day, we can pretty much represent these options in a union type. So let's create the type. So underneath the interface task, I can create a type, and this will be task priority, and then this will be equal to low, or within vertical line, this could be normal, or again used in vertical line, this could be high. And now we have created a type within union. So we say, hey, this type task priority could either be low, normal, or high. Not null, not undefined, not super high, not my god, nothing like that. Only 3 options. And this means for my interface task, instead of now passing a string, I can say, hey, priority is of type task priority. So here's what you should remember. Whenever you use objects or props or something like that, please use interfaces. In my opinion, this makes more sense. Whenever you use union types, primitives, or something like that, then a type makes a lot of sense. You could do it with an interface, it's fine, but I would rather do it with a type. But now let's scroll a bit to the bottom, and we have a new error for priority, and it says type string is not assignable to task priority. What's the problem? So priority is a string, right? Right here we have our useState hook. And if I hover over priority, it says priority is of type string. But as we know, our priority is not of type string anymore, but it's now of type task priority. It's in union now. How can I tell useState, our useState hook, that we now have 3 options, that we don't really expect a string? Yeah, we expect a string, but a string of only 3 types. Good question. So we want to use something which is called a generic. Now, a generic itself is a very complex topic. There are a lot of videos on generics. They can become super complex, but we won't talk about that. We want to keep this video simple. So if you hover over useState, you see something right here. useState angle bracket string angle bracket. Then we have the initial state and our set state action. So our initial state is the priority and the set state action is our set priority. And as you see, we always have these angle brackets and it always says string. Why is that? Well, that's because TypeScript inferred from normal that this is of type string. But this isn't of type string as we know. So what we can do is we can add a generic. We can add these angle brackets before these parentheses and then we can pass task priority. This means if I now hover over useState, you now see we have task priority. It says initial state is of type task priority and also our set state action is of type task priority. This is a generic. This means also if I again scroll to the bottom, we don't have an error for our priority anymore, and that's because TypeScript knows that priority is of type task priority. Now again, generics are a very complex topic. Let me show you an example quickly. So here's an image. As you see, it's a bit blurry, so sorry for that, but I think you should still see everything. So we have a type with a generic type. This is pretty much the name, maybe. And then we have these angle brackets t. That's the type parameter. This t currently could be anything. This means when we do a constant a and give it a type of maybe, we add these brackets and say this is of type string. And that's the same logic with our useState hook. You can pretty much think of a useState hook like in type. Pretty much. This useState hook at the end of the day has the same type parameter of t. And now we want to pass something for this type. So you could also add a string, for example, right here. Again, if I hover over useState, we now have a string. If I pass a number and hover over useState, we now have a number and we expect a number. Or again, we can add our task priority, which is in union type. So at the end of the day, a generic pretty much allows you to create a very dynamic function, because sometimes your function can take multiple things, not only a string, but maybe a string and number, or maybe a string, number and boolean, or multiple things. And that's why you create a generic, because you maybe don't know what type you will get. And that's why the useState hook uses a generic, because useState internally does not know what you will provide. So that's why you can add a generic and say, hey, useState will expect expect this type or a number or a boolean or something like that. So now I hope that you understand generics at least a little bit. Just remember it like that. Generics allow you to add dynamic types. The useState is stupid. It does not know what you want to pass. And with a generic, you can tell this function explicitly what you will expect and what you will pass. So now we are finished with this, but we still have an error. If I scroll a bit to the bottom, for set tasks, we get an error. Task is not assignable to type never. What's the problem? Well, right here we have a useState for our tasks, and the initial value is an empty array. If I hover over useState, it says that the value which it expects is never array. But we don't really expect never array. Inside of our tasks, we want to store our task object in the array. So how can we tell TypeScript this? Well, again, we want to use a generic. So let's get our angled brackets and let's pass our task. But now we have one error. Right here it now says, hey, array is not assignable to object. So what do we do now? Well, at the end of the day, we want to store an array, as mentioned, with multiple task objects. This means for the task, I can append an array symbol. And now this error is gone. So now we tell TypeScript that this useState will store one array with multiple task objects. And if I now scroll to the bottom, you see this error is now gone. Great. Now we have an error for our task. So for the get time remaining in our params, we get a task. And now we have an error. What's the problem? Well, TypeScript does not know what type task is. But we know what type task is. It's this object with the ID, title, and description. So we can say, hey, task is of type task. And now this error is also gone. And now we have also an error for do and now. If I hover over do, it says the left-hand side of an arithmetic operation must be of type any, number, big int, or an enum type. But right here you see do is of type date. So the problem right here is that at the end of the day, you cannot subtract an object minus an object, if this makes sense. You want to subtract a number by a number. Who would have thought? So what we can do is we can use the getTime method. This will convert at the end of the day our date to a number, and then everything will work as expected. Great. But here's one thing which I want to show you. So if I hover over get remaining, you now see, okay, in the params we get a task which is of type task, and then we return a string. So right here TypeScript inferred that we return a string. So as you see, we use our upticks and then we return, for example, 5 days left. You could also hard type it, you could pass your own type. So after these parentheses, you could add a colon and say, hey, we want to return a string. And we return a string, so there are no errors. We could also say, hey, I want to return a number. And now we get an error. So instead of returning a number, we currently return a string. But if I would say 5, and if I return right here, I don't know, 0, and if I return right here, for example, 10, then this error again goes away because we now return a number. So as you see, you can also type at the end of the day the return, but we want to return a string. So right here, everything is correct. Let's now continue with our sort tasks function. What's the problem right here? Well, it does not know what type A is and what type B is. B and A is of type any, but it shouldn't be of type any, it should be of type task. So for A, we can say, hey, this is of type task, and for B, this is also of type task. And now this error is also gone. But now we have a new problem, and that's for our priority. So for the onChange handler, we currently just say, hey, we get our event, and then let's set our priority to e.target.value. First of all, why don't we have to give our e a type? Well, at the end of the day, TypeScript inferred the type for us. But what's the problem right here? Well, e.target.value is of type string. But at the end of the day, set priority is now of type task priority. And task priority again is our union type, low, normal, high. So let's again go back and we can do a little trick. We can use the as keyword, and e.target.value will be as task priority. So with this, we pretty much say, hey, I know that you expect a string, but I know that we right here get this value. We only have 3 options. So I will just hijack you and I will say, hey, I know that we get the correct values, don't throw an error, don't annoy me, let's just set it as task priority. And now this error is gone. And that's a little trick. And this is something which you will use a lot because at the end of the day, e.target.value is always a string, but when we use a select, we always know what we get. So this is safe to do so. Okay friends, so you should now know enough TypeScript to get started with it in your React or Next.js project. Now here are a few things which you should remember whenever you work with TypeScript. First of all, TypeScript is stupid. It throws a lot of errors, it screams at you, and I know it can be annoying, but trust me, you want to use TypeScript. Auto-completion is pretty much already reason enough to use it, and catching errors early is of course also super beneficial, because let's be honest, sometimes you misspell stuff, and if you use JavaScript you won't know that. Only once you push it to production and somebody writes you, hey, your website is broken. So trust me, I know, TypeScript is stupid, sometimes it throws a lot of errors, but take a moment, think through it, and you will understand what you have to do. Secondly, errors can get very long, very fast. So if I delete the task priority again and hover over priority, we have an error, right? This is a very short error, but sometimes errors can get so long that they remind you of an essay. So here's my best practice to you. Scroll to the bottom of the error and start from the bottom. The two errors at the bottom often already tell you what the problem is. The top errors are often very cryptic and you don't really understand what they mean. So inside of here, for example, it's very easy. Type string is not assignable to this type task priority. So always scroll to the bottom and the bottom two error messages should already give you the answer, or they should give you the most context in plain English of what is currently going wrong. Thirdly, Google is your best friend. Sometimes I get errors where I think to myself, what the hell is this? And that's normal. Sometimes you don't understand it. At the end of the day, hover over your error, copy the error message, ask ChatGPT, ask Google. But don't just copy the result, think through it and see how you can fix it later on without asking a third-party service. And now there's one more thing which I want to show you. Now, this isn't a best practice or anything. It's kind of a bad practice. Nevertheless, you should know about it because sometimes you will have to use it. And this is as any. So currently we have our onChange handler and we set our string, so e.target.value, as task priority. And that's because we know that the options are either low, normal or high, meaning they are the same to our union type. But sometimes you know that this result is also still valid, but you don't have the type. So let's imagine you wouldn't have the task priority, but now you have this error. How do you fix this problem, this error, without having the correct property, the correct type, Well, there's one escape code and this is as any. Now currently you get an error, this is for ESLint, I can just disable this ESLint rule, and as you see I don't get any errors. This is an escape code if you don't know what the correct type is, but you know that at the end of the day the value is still correct. Now you should limit the amount of use of any. This is again only an escape code. If everything fails, then you can use it. But you should always strive to not use it. You should always rather create your own types and then add them right here. Because if I add as any, we pretty much now say, hey, the value can be anything, a number, a string, or something like that. So you don't want to do that. There are use cases where I use as any as an escape code, but this is very rare and you should do the same. And now there's one more tip which I want to give to you. TypeScript sometimes can be very hard, especially when starting. So my recommendation to you is actually watch a tutorial. How about you watch one of my tutorials? I use in all of my projects TypeScript, and this will help you with just getting started. You have to get the feel of TypeScript. Once you get the feel, you can pretty much fix all of the errors with the help of Google, but you first of all need to get the feel for it. So watch a tutorial, watch maybe 2 tutorials, once you get the feel for it, and then start your own project and just work with TypeScript. Don't use as any, try to get it to work. And now, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I can see you in the next video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me and my heart. I will do one advanced TypeScript video sometime in the future, maybe also one video about generics and stuff like that. But now, I hope you enjoy your day and see you in the next one. Bye! Whew. Alright friends, enjoy your day. I will now edit this video. We will see ourselves in the next video. Bye bye.